For years and years and years, and going through a couple of notebooks, I've been trying to draw faces. But the issue was that there was always something inconsistent. The jaw, the eyes, the nose. I didn't know how to do it. And there is one very specific facial construction method that you may have heard thrown around before called the Loomis method. And when I first discovered it, I didn't really know how to apply it that well. The videos I found and tutorials I found didn't really explain it in a way that I understood it. But then there was one video on a TikTok, and I don't remember who made this, so if you find the original creator, please give them credits. But basically, they took the idea of the Loomis method, and like with the other methods that we used before, they used a model. And so this is basically like a foam sphere that you can get at the Dollar Tree or Walmart, wherever you might find something like this. You shave off the sides, and then you make your markings for the Loomis method. Now I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but this is what we're going to be using for this video. Alright, so before I start this, I do want to clarify. This is a lesson on structure. It's not a lesson on anatomy. So take it with a grain of salt. This is only to get you a baseline of being able to get, like, you know, consistency and correct proportions. But you do still have to remember to learn things like anatomy and the direction and shape of a jaw on your own. Alright, so let's get into the Loomis method. Here I have a picture of a skull, and you're going to start like this. You have a circle, if I can draw a circle. You don't have to be perfect. You have a circle, and what you're going to do is you have a side plane, which is going to represent your temple. Now this side plane is going to be another semicircle. It's going to be like this half of the skull is essentially shaved off, kind of like your temple is, where it's flat on the side of your skull. So you have that, and then you have a cross section right here. This just tells you the direction that the skull is pointing. Like, is it pointing horizontally, vertically? Is it perpendicular with the spine, and whatnot? And then you have a secondary line, which is going to be adjacent to the first line. Now, it's key to remember that when you're drawing, these two circles with this plane is always going to be at a 90-degree angle. And when we make that model I showed you earlier, this will make things a lot easier. But you just do want to remember, for consistency's sake, that you are going to have this 90-degree angle for this side plane. So let's take note of that. Now this side plane that is going to be in the middle, these are both in the middle of this cut off circle. This is going to represent the brow ridge. And so the brow ridge is the area above the eyes where your eyebrows will be located, and it's going to be the landmark for the first third of the face. Now, the issue with most people drawing heads is you might see something like this, and then you'll do this, and then this, and then they'll draw their eyes right here. But what comes up is that your forehead might end up being too big, your ear placement might be a little bit weird. This is where the Loomis method shines so brightly, is because the proportions are very consistent and very accurate. So with that being said, for this top half of the circle, it is going to curve and follow the form of the skull. But for the bottom half, where it's split by the brow ridge, it's actually going to come straight down. From then on, you're going to have the rest of the anatomy of the face. So you have the jaw that comes up right here into the cheekbone, and the brow ridge would come up into the eye. Jaw follows back up here. And then what's cool to note is that right around where your mouth starts is also going to be where the bottom lobe of your ear starts, and right around the top of the brow ridge is going to be where your ear ends. So it's always good to note that. If I remember how to draw ears. So, this is a very elongated face, and it is because it's going to be a little bit more similar to a human form. You still have fat and skin and hair that's going to go on top and fill out all these areas. So it is imperative to remember that when you're drawing a skull as well, that there are going to be other factors. Now, would I draw it exactly like this? No, probably not. But that's where we're going to get into stylization, proportion, etc. But do keep in mind that you can still use this for consistency. So as you're following the center line of this circle, you then come down to the bridge of the nose, then bring it outward, and then you might have your mouth right here. And then your eyes follow. The pattern of the brow ridge. Something like that. Now, obviously, this top half does look a little bit thin. It is just because this is like a skull I got from the dollar store. I'm just using it for an example, but this is essentially the basics of how it works. Now, so while this skull might not be the best representation, there are some things that I do want you to consider while you're drawing. Namely, your landmarks. So you're going to have the roundness of the chin, a bit of a divot between the cheekbone and your jaw, and then a roundness by the cheekbone, and then you're going to have a divot for where the eye socket is, and then it's going to protrude at the brow ridge and come back into the skull. Coming back from the other side is going to swoop upward, and then there's going to be muscle right here, so there's actually going to come out just a little bit past the jawbone, and then go behind this area right here into where the ear would be located. Voila. From then on, I'll usually go to the nose, choosing the furthest side of the bridge because that's the last visible part you'll see. And what I'll do is I will swoop it up into the brow, not necessarily show the tip of the nose, but the bottom part on where it connects. And then I might add an extra line at the bottom just to add more depth. From then on, add the secondary brow and fill in the details from there, but I'll get to that in a second. Alright, so now let's talk about the model. Now the model is, it's upside down. The model is going to be a styrofoam sphere. You can get this Dollar General, Dollar Store, wherever you can find something like this. And the whole idea is that you recreate the Loomis. Oh. Somebody asked in the comments last video. Yes, I do have a cat. She's great. Anyways. The whole idea is that you re-represent the model with the styrofoam sphere. So, you cut off the sides, you draw your plane. This is going to represent your brow ridge, the side plane, and then the center line. And now the whole idea is you can position this at any angle, just like I did with the box model in the last video. And you should be able to get a pretty decent idea for how you could represent the face. Now, this isn't 100% foolproof. There are some things to consider when you're using the Loomis method. Namely, if this is going to be the face and the side is chopped off to represent the temple, you still have more skull behind that side. So you want to remember that there is still volume in this space, but this side just represents where your eyes would end and where the temple begins. Another thing, the skull is not a perfect square. It's a little more oval shaped. And so something I like to remember is when I'm drawing, I like to remember the shape of the brain, not the shape of the skull. Because when you think about the shape of the brain, you don't think about a circle, you think about an oval. The skull is the exact same way. So when you're drawing, remember that this bottom portion isn't going to be represented entirely. By the way, spooky season is approaching, so I highly recommend going to the dollar store and finding one of these as well, because I paid like, I want to say like 10-15 bucks on Amazon for a skull model a year ago, and I could have just gotten this for $1, and it gives you a pretty good idea. You know, you could study the way the chin moves, the way the jaw the way the jaw moves, your angles, your proportions, but this is a much better method. And I also want to remind you, this is not going to be complete without studying anatomy a little bit, you know, knowing like how the bridge of your nose works or the brow ridge, your cheekbones, the way your jaw comes back up into the ear, etc. Getting a better grasp of how those things work is only going to make using this that much easier. This is just for structuring. It's only so that you can represent the image in your mind a lot faster than having to memorize it. At least for me personally, I can't, you know, think about a box and then apply it immediately. I have to have the structure in front of me, which is why I made the other box model. This is why I made this as well, because it helps me get a better idea and memorization for how to draw ahead. Also, I know I'm going to get asked this a lot. So before anybody does, is there a specific method to getting this right? Yes. It's called eyeballing it. You don't have to put in too much effort, you know? It's just, you just have to have the side plane. You just have to have the face. What I did was I taped it off in the center as best I could on both sides, and then I drew on it with a Sharpie. You don't have to be perfect. It just has to work. That's all art is. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to work. I'm sure other people would say otherwise. And there are some things where you want to refine your work, but when you're just getting into it, you don't have to be so serious. Okay, so now the question is, how would I represent this? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a circle, draw my plane, then draw the two splits in between. This is a little wide, so let's just make it a little more narrow. Come over here, maybe like right there. And then we have our brow ridge. And then we have to remember, you know, our various steps. So it is going to be the frontal line, you are going to have, so you're going to have the center line, which drops straight down, follows the curvature of the top, but drops straight down at the rear. And since I'm going for a more manga style approach with my face is going to be a lot smaller in comparison to this one, where I have about a third of drop off from the circle. I'm only going to have maybe about like a sixth, you know, not too much of a difference from the circle, because, you know, your anime or your faces in an anime are going to be generally a little bit smaller. So we're going to have that, then the connection point from the chin back up to the ear, which is going to be represented by the split of this plane right here. Then do an elf, because I like elves. I don't know. Come over here, and then remember what I said. You have the deviation between, for the face, of the bottom half of the jaw and the upper cheekbone. It's going to come back up, connect at the cheekbone, about right there. Then come out for the brow ridge, and then swoop back up. Right about there, yeah. And for different art styles, of course, you can represent this cheekbone differently. In fact, I do want to bring it out just a little bit more. So that is what we are going to do. And then also make the brow ridge just a little bit more subtle. But it depends on style, consistency, knowledge, and what your preference is. But, okay. So now we have a pretty good foundation. Let's lighten this up. And so, what do we remember? Well, we remember that this line actually represents the brow ridge, meaning this is where the eyebrows are going to sit. So we have one eyebrow. And then if our center line is here, then that means our nose is going to come up. And it's key to remember that the nose actually blends into the brow ridge. At least that's the easiest way to remember it when you're drawing. So, nose is going to come up, blend into the brow ridge, and then the furthest eyebrow is going to follow in. Come down. Remember how I like to do my noses. I want to make the nose just a little bit more curved. Come down, do that. And then, sometimes when I'm drawing, if I'm having trouble placing the eyes, what I'll do is I'll just do 2 little dots. Especially if I'm just doing like sketches or gestures. This will help me represent the eyes without having to go through and like totally draw it. But I might do something like this. For now, I am just going to do closed eyes because I don't want to overcomplicate the illustration too much. So, have our eyes closed like this. It's also imperative to remember that your eye is going to be sunken back further than the brow ridge. Meaning that whenever you draw your eyebrow, especially in a 3/4 pose like this, it's always going to be a little bit more towards the center line than the eye on the side that's closest to you. So let me describe that again. If this eye is closest to you, then your brow ridge is going to be pointed outward. And the eye is going to be sunken inward. Because the eye is, it's going to be in the socket right here. So that's what pushes your eyebrow forward. But for this other eye, we're just going to do this. And maybe I want to move it back just a little bit more, actually. Another thing to remember is that if this is the temple right here, this is also going to be where the edge of the eye meets. So when you're considering how far to draw your eye left or right, this is going to be the point right here. You want the edge of the eye to touch right here. So we have that. Then I can make the markings for the eye sockets. Realize that I accidentally switched pans. And then we're just going to do a real simple mouth. I don't feel like overcomplicating it. And I don't like how this cheek is actually represented, so I am just going to adjust just slightly to compensate for the rest of the face. Come up towards the brow. Make the chin just a little bit shorter, a little less sharp. Then bring her ear outward. Don't want to make it too big. And voila, we have a face. Now, by flipping the canvas, I can see some things I don't like. Namely, this area for the jaw right here, it is just a little, it could be a little bit sharper. So what we're going to do is just clean this up. And this looks better to me. Now, some other things I might fix. I might make, or want to make the face just a little bit more slim. So I could clean it up around the eye socket. And maybe add a little bit more definition to the nose. So like I said, I normally wouldn't place the tip of the nose, but for this case scenario, I kind of want to. And then just for personal detail, I add texture on the nose, and then by the eyes. Then draw a neck, come down here, blah, blah, blah. Now some other things to consider. Remember that when you're drawing hair, a good proportion for the top of the head, especially when you're looking at it dead on, is always going to be about a 1-to-1 proportion. So from your eye socket to your chin, and then back up to the top of the skull. But this does look a little awkward in this pose, so that might mean that my face is actually a little bit too wide. So I'm just going to slim it up a bit. There we go, get a good look at it. Now the face looks a lot better. And depending on the hair, you might actually go over this 1-to-1 ratio just because of the texture of the hair. If it's a little bit lighter, a little more fluffy, a little more bouncy. But I'm just going to do it simple. So say our hairline starts like right here. Come down. Draw the face. And then what I like to do is I like to make the hair kind of fall down onto the gravity of the head and then protrude outward just to give it volume. But then it comes back just because of its texture. So do the same with this side. Draw some texture like that. And we have an elf character. I hope this makes sense so far. If I'm not hitting any points that I should be hitting, please let me know in the comments and I'll try and clarify it. But as we are right now, this is how I would use the Loomis method. Add in some personal stylized details just to show the texture in the hair coming upward and the hairline. But I like using the structure because it is very consistent. You know, you can draw any head at any angle, and so long as you follow the consistency, then you are going to get something that is rendered very well. And because I'm lazy, I'm just going to keep the eyes closed again. I want to show a good example of how you can render something very easily. Here's a little bit less detail, a little less focus to attention. But you're able to get your idea down relatively quick once you've practiced this method enough. Okay, so here we have our skull again, and then this time we're going to go for a side profile. Now, something I want you to remember is that when you have your skull, it's not going to be like this. It's not going to be like this. At least when we're looking at it from a general side profile where it's upright, it's going to be like this. Alright? And so, you have to remember that the way the skull is going to be formed, this guy has a bit of an underbite. But in most skulls, we have a bit of an overbite. And so what's going to happen is it's actually going to form this shape, alongside following the nose, of course. But it's going to follow this shape. So what we're going to do is... Actually, I'll leave that there. We'll have our circle. Have that. Have your side plane. And to all the people who are in the comments that are going to say, well, I can't even draw a circle first. I totally understand. Like 100%. It just takes time. But we're going to have our side plane marked out. Our 90-degree angle. And I'm not going to follow the skull entirely because I still want to stylize this a little bit. So actually, let me just dim this down to the point where I can't really see it too much. And so we know that our brow ridge is going to be right here. Come up. Follow this line. That the nose is going to come down. I'd actually want to... Sorry. I'd actually want to curve the nose just a little bit out more. Come down, then do that. And I normally make the lip protrude just a little bit towards the nose, and then come down as such. But remember, we're trying to follow this downward sloping shape, so you don't want the bottom lip to be in front of the top lip. Come down, come back into the jaw, and follow the jawbone just slightly outward, and then come back up in towards where the ear would be sitting. As such, maybe draw just a little bit of continuation for the mouth. Draw the ear. And since she is an elf, the ear is actually going to be below this line, just because it comes outwards and back instead of upward. But if you're drawing a human ear, it would be more like that. For design's sake, though, it is going to be an elf ear. So there's that. Boom. Boom. Oops, and I did something wrong here. The ear itself is actually going to be slanted this way. This is where you start the ear, but it is actually going to be slanted this way. So you can bring it back just a little bit from that line. Continue your ear. And then, remember, you can draw a dot just to represent the eye. This is going to be the temple, so this is going to be where the edge of the eye is. But I might draw it something like this. Remember your eye socket, the way it comes out, your eyebrow, and also the fact that you might see a little bit of eyelash coming out on the other side as well. Then you have another skull. Like I said, remember that the skull is actually going to be a little bit elongated and you are going to follow the shape downward, but your neck would come down from the back of the skull, then follow outward as such. You can fill in the details from here. The biggest thing is just to remember that whenever you have a side profile, it is going to follow this sort of bracket shape. That's how you keep it from like looking awkward, looking silly. But in time you'll learn your proportions of the jaw, your eyebrow, etc. Righty, just for demonstration on how this works on a real life form. I got these images from Pinterest, by the way. They are, of course, not mine. Here we start with the circle. We are going to start with the side plane that represents the temple. We're going to split this circle into quarters. Remember our 90-degree plane. And, of course, like I said, this represents the brow, not the eye. So, that means that this can actually come up a little bit. So that's what we're gonna do here. Come up, enlarging it. Turn it this way a little. Yeah. Alright, from then on, we have the brow. And the center line coming from the front, it's going to curve alongside the top and then come straight down for the rest of the face. From then on, the jaw comes up towards the ear and flows back into the center line where the ear protrudes outwards. Remember that the jaw is actually slightly angled as well as the ear itself. Draw the ear like that. Then you have the neck coming down in towards the face. And then you have your eyes. Remember that your eyes fall alongside the temple. Eyebrows coming out. Then you have your nose bridge at the center line. The other eye protruding out from this side. I also want to talk about eyes in the future sometime. Not just the skull structure, but the shape of eyes and how we perceive them, and how we can draw them a little bit better. But that's a video topic for another time. Face comes through here. Have your lips. Always remember that your facial structure is going to follow this shape as it comes down into the nose. A bracketed shape. And then you have a stylized parting of the lips. So, from this you could see how accurate the Loomis method can be on a real-life head. Like I said, there are some things that you need to remember. The skull is going to be a little more flat on top than a circle would normally be. It's going to be a little more oval-shaped. Coming down from the backside, the skull is actually going to end right around here instead of right here. But because you have the neck in the way, you aren't going to worry about it that much. Those are all things to consider. But once you study this method properly and you use it more frequently, those aren't going to be things that you worry about. Because you do also have to consider that you are going to have hair which fills those gaps anyways, as such. And so that's where learning about how to draw hair comes into play. But it's not something that you necessarily need to worry about all the way. Now let's do another example. This time from more of an aggressive frontal angle. Oh my god. See, drawing circles is hard. Alright, come over here, come over here. Adjust the circle to be the size of the head. We're going to start with the brow. That way I can map out this plane easier. Gonna come over here. Remember that goes right there. Follow this down into the ear ridge. A little bit more angled. Mark for our 90-degree center. Come back over here. Curve for the upper half, straight down for the second half. And then follow the facial lines. And I want you to remember that when you're using the Loomis model, it is more of a reference, a structure. It's not a baseline. It's not something that you have to follow all the time. Do whatever you feel is comfortable, but for me, it's what I use. So come down here. Then remember that your brow is going to be pushed forward more than the eye socket itself, meaning that the eyebrow is also going to be pushed forward a little bit. Come here. Make your markings for the nose ridge. And draw your neck. And there you have your second face. Of course, remember that some of these details aren't going to be filled in entirely, so things like the hair will fill a lot of the volumes that look like they're missing. And a little artist secret, you can also cheat structuring your head by hiding a lot of it with the hair. That's what a lot of people do. They just don't talk about it. I do it all the time, trust me. When in doubt, just cover whatever you feel cover whatever you feel looks weird. Like the hair, the face, the hands, whatever. And that is this too. As I'm wrapping up this video, I do want to remind you guys that you should still be remembering to study, your facial structures by using a skull or looking up diagrams of like facial muscles, how the skull works, etc. You want to learn how the eye sockets work. That way you're setting a good baseline for yourself to then delve into stylization. The reason why you don't necessarily want to start with stylization immediately, and some people do, and some people make it work. For me personally, the reason why I wouldn't start with stylization immediately and would start drawing more from life and from real life examples is just so I could set a good baseline for myself. Set proportions that are going to be consistent and then change those proportions based on my preference. But how I would recommend applying this method, the Loomis method, for studying, aside from making the model, is drawing the Loomis head on real life head sculptures, and or looking up your favorite artist and drawing the Loomis head on their art. You're going to find a couple things, because you're going to find artists who are actually really good at using this method and artists who don't use it at all. And you'll find that some of the proportions are a little misplaced or out of whack, And that'll tell you two things. It'll tell you that you don't have to take the proportions that you draw so seriously because one of your favorite artists made it work and made it look good. But at the same time, it'll also tell you where you can improve that this artist that you're appreciating did not take into consideration. With that being said, in the future, I do want to make videos talking more on anatomy, about skull, the skeleton, bones, the muscle structures, tendons, etc. But for now, I'm just trying to get a baseline for like structure. That's exactly what the Loomis method is. So if I didn't talk in depth enough about how the brow ridge, ridge works, or how the nose bridge works, I do apologize. I will plan to talk about those in the future, but if you did learn something from this video, I would gladly like to hear about you from it. I didn't expect my last two videos to explode the way they did, so I am really thankful for all the support from you guys. I'm glad to hear that you guys have learned a lot, and that you're able to apply these things in a manner that I wish I could have when I was still studying this stuff. As we delve into anatomy and other things, of course, things will start to make sense if they aren't clicking now. But the best thing I can say is just don't stress too much. Seriously. Art is one of those things that's supposed to be enjoyed. And the more you stress about it, the more difficult it becomes to actually do it. You know. So really take your time to just get into the flow and just enjoy what you're doing. With that being said, I'd like to make more of this content for you guys, so I'd really appreciate, like, you know, the good old like, subscribe, etc. Keep in mind that as I'm learning alongside you guys. You know, I'm teaching myself this stuff when I can, and the stuff that I already know, I'm teaching you guys. So we're both in the same process of trying to be better artists. Anyways, thanks so much, and I really appreciate it. I will see you guys in the next one.